What's going on, guys? So we are in the JavaScript Funda web series, video series, and in the last video, we looked at a couple of very important concepts. So just to have a very quick recap, I've just jotted down these things. So let me just take it up. In fact, let me just save this once and okay, leave it. Let me put it over here. Yeah. So at first, what we looked at is the global execution context runs by default at when the program is executed. Okay. So always by default, the global execution context will run, and you don't have control on that. Okay. Otherwise, whenever a function is getting executed, okay, and mind you, when I say function executed, I mean a parenthesis in front of a function, otherwise it doesn't get executed. So when a function is getting executed, an execution context, a local execution context will be created for that. And as a result, you will have one global context, execution context, and multiple local execution contexts in the entire scope of the program. Now, the second point was that as part of the execution context configuration, the scope is identified, hoisting is done as part of that scope, and scope chain is assigned during any function declaration. The scope chain contains the outer scope of that function, which means the chain of references to all the functions and variables till the global, okay, up till the global. And then the third point is that whenever a local function is executed, a new local execution context is created and put on the stack, which is what I already told you. So to summarize, an execution context contains three things: its own scope, its outer scope, and the value of the this pointer. Okay, so now having said that, what I'll do is, so in order to get a very good understanding of how the hoisting and the scope marry into each other when the execution happens, right? What I'm going to do is I'll just illustrate the entire process with the help of a simple program. Okay, and I have just used a notepad for that. So just give me a moment. Let me just minimize this. And yeah, so I have this example. Over here, what I have done is I have placeholders for the different scope pointers. And at each step, I have shown that I have two very important pointers. One is the scope pointer and one is the outer scope pointer. Outer scope, of course, is the scope chain we are talking about. And scope will contain the own scope. Okay. And uh, so with that, what I'll do is at each step, I'll give you a moment to pause and think about what exactly will be there in the scope and outer scope. And then I'll let you know what's the outcome. Okay. So have a look at this program and just spend a couple of minutes. I'll just pause the video. Okay. So what's the program talking about anyway? This is a variable x declared with 0 value. This is a function 1. Inside this, we are declaring a variable y initialized to 1. And then in line 12, we have a function 2, which is basically a nested function. Okay. So nested function. And then in line 16, that nested function is having another variable declaration called z with the value 2. And then inside, we are just doing a console log for all three. And then when you are coming out of it, we are actually executing the function 2 over here in line 24. And then finally in line 27, we are calling the function 1. Okay, that's basically the function for you. And let me do one thing over here. Let me just save this. Okay, so I need to just go into that folder because I was working with Notepad. Okay, so I saved this as practice24.js. Okay, so now, yeah, so one good thing is that we have some uh, good flavor from Notepad++, right? I hope the language is JavaScript, but just let me check. Yeah, the language is JavaScript. Okay, so now if we consider how this program is going to execute, right? At first, line number 1, we have in the scope, X is undefined, and that's because of the way the X is hoisted, right? Outer scope, nothing is there. Now at line 2, X is initialized to 0. So in line 3, the scope will contain X as what? And of course, outer scope okay, so just take a minute and think about what will be there over here. So I think it's very easy to predict that this will be 0. And again, outer scope, we don't have anything over here. And still we are in the global execution context. So what I'll also do over here is I'll have the global, so stack global execution context. And then what happens is uh, in the global execution context, we have this function 1. Okay. Now when it encounters function 1, that time, again, what happens over here? So again, we should have scope and we should have outer scope. So each time we want to know what's the scope and outer scope. So yeah, again, take a moment and think about it. Okay, so in line 5, when it comes to line 5, okay, so we can say over here 1, 3, then 5. Now over here, it should assign the scope which is here to the outer scope over here. Okay. What I can do is I can call this as local scope. Okay. So local scope and outer scope. Now outer scope becomes the local scope which was there previously, which is nothing but X, right? This is going to be the outer scope and we don't have a local scope at this time. When will the local scope start? When the function 1 will be executed. Okay. Now, it straight away comes to 26 after that. Line number 26, because it's still in the global execution context. Now, what happens over here? Line number 26 is the function 1 getting called. So, when the function 1 will be getting called, will be getting executed, then what will just happen? What's going to be the local scope over here? Again, take a moment. Okay, so if you realize that the local scope will be built by the execution context of the function 1, which was not yet done till now. So now, because as part of the configuration step of that executions context, okay, so and also like we should say that right now we have function 1 execution context, and we are in line 8. No, not yet line 8. So we are still in the beginning, in line 5. Now the hoisting would have taken place, and y is a variable, right? So it would have recognized this variable declaration and hoisted it, and so stored a value of undefined in y. So y is equal to undefined, that is going to be stored over here. Okay, so that's at the step line 5. Now after this, after line 5 we come to line 7, line 8, sorry, line 8. In line 8, so even before that, in line 7, what will happen? Again, take a moment. Sorry, let me just take this out once. So effectively in line 9, what will happen is that it's just that y has been assigned to 1. Okay, so that's it as of now. Now we come to line, which line? Line 11. Line 11 is going to be a function declaration, and so what will happen over here? Take a moment to think about it. Okay, so the next line is going to be line 23, which is inside the function 1, which is this. So copy this, paste over this. So now, and of course I'll just take away this and this both. So what's going to be the local scope and the outer scope at this point of time inside the execution context of function 1? Okay, so if you have guessed it, then yeah, so basically at this point of time we are going to execute function 2. So we are actually over here, and put this as function to execution context. Okay, and this we will put now over here. Z is going to be not Z but y is now going to be 1, and that is the local scope, right? Think about it. Think about it again. Yeah, so when this function was passed initially in the line 11 over here, when we were in the function 1 execution context, at that point of time it created the outer scope, which is x0, and the local scope of this will be passed. So at that time we had this y as 1. Okay, and this actually is going to be here, right? Local scope was not there, but now the local scope is there. Okay, and as per the local scope at this point of time we don't have anything, or do we? Yes, we have z equal to undefined. Okay, that's the local scope and outer scope. Now line 15, line 15. Okay, so when it's line 15 we are actually having z. So now in line 16 over here, what would we have? So z would become 2, right? Everything else is same. So now if we print xyz, we should be getting x as 0, y as 1, and z as 2, right? So let's just check this out. So x 0, y 1, and z is 2. So this must have given you a very good understanding of the way the scope chaining happens along with the execution of the program. In our next video, we'll get to look at a bit more tricky example, but we will be following the exact same process of just creating a dry run of the program, and I'll be showing the local scope and the outer scope. Okay, so till that time, thanks, stay tuned.